Joachim Peiper was the personification of Adolf Hitler's ideal Aryan warrior, a disciplined, charismatic, and lethal officer in command of the feared panzer divisions. Recognized for his leadership on the Eastern Front and during the Battle of the Bulge, he played a prominent role in some of the most brutal campaigns of World War II. After the war, Peiper was captured and tried for war crimes, receiving a sentence that was commuted after years of imprisonment. However, the weight of his past haunted him throughout his life. Rejected in Germany, he sought refuge in France, where he tried to maintain a low profile while dealing with the stigma of his actions. In 1976, anti-fascist activists identified his whereabouts in Travers, France, and attacked his home, setting it on fire during the night. Peiper, loyal to his principles until the end, refused the possibility of returning to a Germany that had repudiated him and chose to remain in exile, facing the consequences of his past. Joachim Peiper, the emblem of the Leibstandarte. Joachim Peiper's story is marked by the brutality of his actions and a finale filled with both revenge and retribution. Understanding his origins, his trajectory, and his role in World War II is crucial to better comprehend his tragic end. Peiper was born on January 30, 1915, in Wilmersdorf, a district of Berlin within the German Empire. His family had a military influence, as his father, Waldemar Peiper, served as an officer in the Imperial German Army, fighting in the 1904 campaign in German Southwest Africa. Shortly after, he contracted malaria and fell into a severe state of health. However, in 1907, Waldemar resumed his activities and joined the Prussian army and later the armed forces during World War I. While on an important excursion to Ottoman Turkey, he suffered chronic heart problems due to a previous malaria infection. During the interwar period between 1918 and 1939, Waldemar Peiper joined the company of mercenary soldiers within the Freikorps, a paramilitary unit of German volunteers. There, he actively participated in the repression of the Polish uprisings in Silesia, which took place between 1919 and 1921. Peiper's father subscribed to anti-Semitic myths, which referred to sensationalist reports, inventions, and falsehoods invented to defame the Jews of Germany and Europe in general. Joachim Peiper had as a model a father who began to align with National Socialist ideas. That is why he began his own path, and in 1926, at the age of 11, he became a Boy Scout and longed to be a military officer. At the age of 18, he joined the Hitler Youth along with his brother Horst. In 1933, he volunteered for the Schutzstaffel. There he followed the orders of Gustav Lombard, a high-ranking Nazi commander, known for his later efficiency in the mass murder of Jews in the Soviet Union. On January 23, 1934, Joachim Peiper was promoted to SS Man, and a year later he rose to SS Strumann at the well-known Nuremberg rallies, also called the Nuremberg Rally, a series of celebration acts coordinated by the Nazi Party. There, Heinrich Himmler, one of the architects of the Holocaust and a close associate of Adolf Hitler, looked favorably on Peiper's performance regarding Aryanism, which refers to the concept of a superior race promoted by Nazism. Our protagonist was incorporated into the SS in 1935 and was later sent to a military leadership course. There, opinions about Peiper were mixed. On the one hand, he received highly favorable and approving reviews from the SS instructors. However, military psychologists perceived an unfavorable egocentrism, as well as a negative attitude and an attempt to impress the Reichsführer, Himmler. In their report, the psychologists detailed that Peiper had high chances of becoming a difficult, superior, and arrogant subordinate. What some could see as defects, others would see as virtues. Between 1935 and 1936, he trained as a military officer at the SS Junker School led by Paul Hauser, a vital figure in the formation of Nazi leaders. There, in addition to imparting military practices, they carried out indoctrination tasks regarding the Nazi worldview based on anti-Semitism. After the recent approaches between our protagonist and Himmler, they finally began working together in 1938. Peiper was taken as his assistant while being trained to become a leader. Within the personal staff of the Reichsführer SS, he was supervised by Karl Wolff, a high-ranking Nazi official. Peiper worked in the antechamber of the SS Central Office. Due to his performance, obedience, and efficiency, He became Himmler's favorite assistant and the one who accompanied him firmly at every official act. Since the beginning of World War II, with the invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, Peiper took on a crucial role. He was a liaison officer between Himmler and Adolf Hitler. More than 2 weeks later, he accompanied his boss to the public execution of 20 Polish social leaders who were accused of leading the partisan resistance to the Nazi occupation. Peiper was one of those responsible for transmitting the Nazi message. In fact, he taught the German values of that time to Ernst Schäfer, a scientific member of the Ahnenerbe, a pseudo-scientific organization created by Heinrich Himmler, which was dedicated to promoting racial doctrines. Schäfer traveled to Tibet and conducted an expedition through Asia, where he sought both to sow and make known the Nazi culture. Peiper was vital in his training regarding the actions carried out by the SS to hunt down and kill Polish intellectuals, arguing the exclusive responsibility of the command to Adolf Hitler. Joachim Peiper was directly involved in the annihilation of people not considered Aryan. On December 13, 1939, in Owinska, Poland, he closely observed the mass murder known as Action T4, which involved placing large amounts of poisonous gases in a psychiatric hospital, whose patients suffered from severe mental illnesses. Peiper himself admitted in post-war interrogations conducted by the United States Army that the gassing action was carried out before a circle of guests. The lunatics were led into a prepared vault whose door had a plexiglass window. After closing the door, one could see how at first the lunatics continued laughing and talking among themselves. But soon, they sat on the straw, obviously under the influence of the gas. Very soon, they no longer moved. In 1940, Peiper was Himmler's loyal aide during the inspection tour of Nazi Germany's concentration camps, visiting, among others, those located in Neuengamme, Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald and Flossenburg. There, they not only evaluated the state and functioning of the camps, but also analyzed both the confinement of Jewish populations and the operation of involuntary euthanasia of the disabled and crippled. In May of that same year, Himmler and his aide closely followed the Waffen-SS during the Battle of France. There, Peiper was designated as a platoon leader in the motorized regiment of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, formed especially to protect the Führer. After a brave military intervention by his platoon, in what was the capture of a French artillery battery, Peiper was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class and consequently promoted to captain, also known as Hauptsturmführer. Just a month later, he received the same award, but in the first-class category. After receiving additional remuneration, Peiper arrived in Germany with a French sports car for his personal use. In November, after an official visit to Francisco Franco's dictatorial Spain, Peiper was promoted to first aide. In 1941, he visited the Lodz ghetto, and in his notes described what he considered a macabre image. We saw how the Jewish police of the ghetto, who wore brimless hats and were armed with wooden sticks, made considerable space for us. While his writings denounced his awareness of the criminality of Nazi occupations, the supposed anecdotes that slandered the Jews aimed to diminish the degree of complicity in the war crimes of the German forces. That same year, he assisted in presenting Himmler's plan, which detailed the method to be used for the murder of 30 million Slavs in Eastern Europe. Shortly after, they continued through Bialystok, witnessing the advances of the civilian depopulation carried out by the order police in both that Polish city and the rest of the country. In addition to carrying out all these activities, Peiper had to make daily reports of the body count under the Kommandostab. During the summer of 1941, he ceased his collaboration with Heinrich Himmler, and in October was reassigned to the motorized regiment of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler in its fight on the Eastern Front. Thus he assumed command of the 11th Company and fought against Soviet forces in Mariupol and Rostov-on-Don. A year later, his battalion was transferred to Vichy, France for recovery and reconditioning. Peiper was sent to a Panzer Grenadier Division where he was promoted to commander of the 3rd Battalion. Peiper's career continued to take paths within the battlefield. In January 1943, he took action in the 3rd Battle of Kharkov. A few months later, he received the German Cross in Gold and the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross for his achievements in that city. There, his unit was nicknamed the Blowtorch Battalion. due to the remembered massacres of two Soviet villages, Yefremovka and Semyonovka, in which the inhabitants were shot and burned by those led by Peiper. Our protagonist was in one of the best moments of his life. Himmler congratulated him on a live radio broadcast after one of the decorations, while Nazi propaganda described him as an exemplary military leader. Das Schwarze Korps, the official SS newspaper, published a note stating that what Peiper did in Kharkov demonstrated his worth as a commander and that he is always the master of situations in all their phases. He was also described as a born leader full of the highest sense of responsibility for the life of each of his men, but who was also capable of being harsh, if necessary, to complete a mission. Such statements placed Peiper in the position of a German war hero. Riding the crest of the wave, Peiper ordered the killing of 24 men who had resisted an attempted massacre in the Italian town of Boves. Finally, they ended up setting the town on fire and killing dozens of partisans. After his time in Ukraine and the Western Front in 1944, Peiper presented himself to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. On December 17th, Peiper advanced with his armored units and half-tracks to face 30 American vehicles at the Bornier Crossroads near Malmedy, Belgium. After overcoming the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, they gathered the defeated with other captured soldiers in a meadow. After waiting a few hours, those led by Peiper opened fire with machine guns, killing 84 soldiers whose bodies were left in the freezing snow. However, some troops managed to survive, so they could later serve as witnesses and thus testify. Peiper's division was scattered throughout the area and took the opportunity to continue their killing spree. In fact, in Belgian municipalities such as Bullingen, Ligneville, Stavelot, Cheneux, La Gleize, and Stoumont. In Stavelots and Trois Ponts, Peiper's men raped and killed a large number of Belgian civilians. In early 1945, after several battle incursions, Kampfgruppe Peiper fought in Operation Southwind and Operation Spring Awakening, Germany's last offensive action in the war. Although Peiper's men fulfilled their function and killed thousands of enemy soldiers, the result ended up being adverse because they suffered a greater number of casualties compared to the opponent. On May 1st of that same year, Peiper received the news he would never have wanted to hear. Führer Adolf Hitler was dead. The war was over, and Germany's defeat was a fact. Despite the High Command's order to surrender, Joachim Peiper refused. However, on May 22, 1945, he was detained by the US Army. Things began to look bleak for Peiper as war crimes investigators initiated a forensic investigation into the already mentioned Malmedy massacre, in which our protagonist and his men were implicated. Peiper was one of the most wanted Nazis by the United States, topping a list of 4 million prisoners of war. Unfortunately for him, the Justice Committee assigned him responsibility and authorship of the massacre. Peiper did not delay in assuming his command responsibility for the actions of his troops. He offered no resistance and soon declared all his guilt. The defeat in the war had not changed Peiper's ideals, who in an interrogation declared that all Jews are bad and all Poles are bad. We just cleaned up our society and moved these people to camps, and you let them free. Several years later, he also left a controversial statement: "I was a Nazi and will remain one." The passage of time does not affect the ideals of certain people. Another of his statements indicated his indignation at the US government's decision to show its refusal to incorporate the Waffen-SS into its army to oppose the Soviet Union. In December 1945, he was transferred to Schwabisch Hall prison, and in April of the following year, he experienced his own personal ordeal when he was sent to the Dachau concentration camp. There, during a 2-month period, the Malmedy massacre trial took place, in which, although more than 74 individuals were tried, all eyes were on Peiper. On July 16, 1946, the court found Peiper guilty of the war crimes he was accused of and sentenced him to hang. However, after several judicial reversals, Peiper did not lose his life under a death sentence, but was sentenced to life imprisonment. By the late 1950s, he ended up being paroled. Immediately, he began working at the Porsche Automotive Company. Due to his excellence at work, he was promoted to secretary. This move caught the attention of the IG Metall Union, which presented their complaints because it may be minimally tolerable to employ war criminals, but it is not allowed to offer them significant promotions. They not only requested that he be removed from his position, but also threatened to launch a publicity campaign against the brand. Once removed from his job, the union warned him that he would be expelled from all companies where he wanted to work. Thus, sometime later, he applied for the position of independent sales promoter for Volkswagen and was not only chosen but also admired by his superiors. In late 1968, Peiper, along with two of his former officers, was accused before a German court of the alleged murder of Italian civilians in 1943 in the town of Boves. According to various parts of the trial, the Nazi unit was prowling the area after two of its troops had been kidnapped by Italian soldiers. Upon noting the situation, he directed his battalion to rescue his men. Upon arrival, he scattered cannons throughout the town and fired 150mm ammunition. The German soldiers were freed, but 34 Italians were annihilated by the defense method imposed by Peiper. After 2 months of debate, the court concluded the process, arguing that there was insufficient evidence to bring formal charges. In 1970, Peiper decided to move with his wife to France, a country he always appreciated. Although his identity was quickly unknown, he received a 7-year residence permit. The couple settled in Traves, a small town near the Saône River with only 280 inhabitants. There he believed he could stay safe with no risk of being found. In fact, his closest neighbor, the artillery captain of the Leibstandarte, Erwin Kettelhut, lived no less than 250 meters away. His children were grown and no longer part of the same household. Heinrich Peiper worked as a lawyer in Frankfurt. Elke, his daughter, was a teacher in Munich, and the youngest daughter, Silke, lived in Hamburg. However, in June 1976, shortly before his residence permit expired, Peiper was detected by his neighbors. The town was plastered with pamphlets that read, "People of Treves, a war criminal, SS Peiper is among us." In the same text, they demanded his expulsion from France, a country that had suffered greatly from the unrestrained attacks propelled by Nazi Germany. L'Humanité, the renowned French newspaper of the time, published an article denouncing Peiper's stay and calling for his exile. It took only a few days for the rest of the local and international newspapers to join their voices against the Nazi officer. The walls of the streets and roads were painted with swastikas, SS runes, and the name Joachim Peiper. Our protagonist was really upset with what had happened, so he went to the French police in the town of Vesoul, who agreed to provide him with a guard for a day. For its part, the West German embassy in Paris offered no solutions but advised him to leave the country. On July 13th, Peiper received letters and phone calls threatening to burn his house and his dogs. The Nazi officer's wife fled, and that same day our protagonist wrote letters to various former SS members seeking help. In the writings, he assured that he was not afraid since the threats seemed to come from cowardly people, but he still had a Colt 38 revolver and a .22 rifle in case he needed self-defense. Kettelhut, his neighbor, lent him a 12-gauge Remington shotgun and also watched the area from his balcony in the mill with 2 loaded rifles. It was 11:30 p.m. when Kettelhut realized there was no danger, so he took a mild sleeping pill and went to sleep. Just over an hour later, the sound of the town's siren woke him from his rest. When he went out to the balcony, he was astonished to see Peiper's house ablaze. The local firefighters approached the house early on July 14th, but discovered that the pump was not working. Although the police interrogated them one by one, they later discovered that it was indeed malfunctioning and that there were no traces of sabotage. After long hours of work and with the fire extinguished, the commissioners discovered a body with severe burn wounds inside the study. They were absolutely surprised because, due to the intense heat generated by the fire, the body had shrunk to a length of 60 centimeters, making it difficult to recognize as a human being. Kettelhut observed the body, and his state of surprise was really concerning. "It's him, but he's miniaturized," he confessed. Under his body, the police found a .22 caliber rifle and a Colt 38 caliber revolver with 5 spent cartridges in the cylinder. On the terrace, they spotted 3 used shotgun shells next to the open 12-gauge Remington, empty and with a huge smell of gunpowder. When visiting the garden, they discovered bullet marks near an oak tree. Peiper's 2 dogs ended up injured, and there were 4 6.35mm bullets in the kennel, which was painted with blood. 2 arson experts determined that the fire had started at the back and spread quickly due to the wooden floors and ceilings. They also realized that the wire fence separating the garden from the meadow had been cut with wire cutters. However, they found no evidence that Peiper had been directly murdered with bullets or beatings. According to the reconstruction by the specialists, Peiper fired his shotgun to fend off his attackers and then returned to the house to save important personal documents and his wife's clothing. After throwing these belongings out of the bedroom window and study door, he continued his defense but was ultimately overcome by the smoke from the fire and died. Peiper's wife requested that her husband be buried in Germany, but an autopsy had to be conducted first. Amazingly, when the body arrived from France, it was missing the head, which later appeared but in pieces. The only tooth left in his mouth was broken. On July 14, 1976, a day after Peiper's death, a statement from an unknown group calling themselves the Avengers was published in the Times of London. The Avengers kill an SS colonel in France. 3 days later, another major British newspaper reported, "This weekend, cars full of tourists gathered in the small village of Traves to take a look at the burnt-out house of Joachim Peiper, the former SS colonel who may not be dead. To this day, mysteries surrounding his death persist, and no one can definitively prove that Joachim Peiper was the person found in the Traves fire." Werner Wolff. The story of Joachim Peiper would be incomplete without mentioning his right-hand man, the person who accompanied him in every battle and important event. We are talking about Werner Wolff, who was born on November 28, 1922, in Memel within East Prussia. In 1940, at the age of just 18, he joined the German armed forces and immediately entered the Panzer Division. He quickly rose to the front lines and earned the trust of his superiors. He possessed immense bravery and an impeccable personality, which made him appear as a consolidated leader despite his young age. Besides his offensive virtues, he was notably distinguished in the destruction of mortars, machine guns, and rifles that threatened his comrades. He had an amazing ability to neutralize critical threats and collaborate towards victory. In February 1943, he participated in the Third Battle of Kharkov, where he excelled in handling a self-propelled gun. He quickly destroyed 11 enemy guns, earning him the Knight's Cross. Also memorable was the moment when he destroyed 2 T-34 tanks with his gun. His superiors, including Joachim Peiper, were amazed by his actions, but not by his potential, as they knew his abilities. Wolff shone in the Battle of Prokhorovka in July 1943. There, during a Soviet attack, he led the defense and was in charge of reorganizing his men under enemy fire. Meanwhile, he destroyed a T-34 tank and killed the enemy commander in a hand-to-hand combat. A few months later, he was shot in the thigh during combat. After analyzing the state of the wound, the doctors determined that they had no other option but to amputate his leg. Wolff entered a state of shock and rage, which had thrown him off balance. When the medical order for the operation arrived, Wolff drew his pistol and threatened the doctors. Shouting, he warned that he was not willing to lose his leg. In his anger, he did not hesitate to fire a shot at the ground. The doctors understood the warning, dropped the scalpel, and let him go. Finally, Wolff successfully recovered from his injury. Another outstanding event in Wolff's life took place in the Battle of Kursk. There, he offered fierce resistance against the Soviet army. When it seemed that an enemy attack threatened to overwhelm him, he and his team took actions with his weapon that brought him back into the fight. He strategically deployed close combat anti-tank teams, and thanks to his quick reaction, he avoided chaos and helped his comrades resume their activities after several days of turmoil. In fact, he discovered that his self-propelled guns were on fire, about to explode. To the surprise of some, he managed to save them and keep them intact. The entire division was amazed to hear that he destroyed a T-34 tank in close combat. When the commander emerged from the war machine, Wolff took a dagger and ended his life. After the battle ended, he was sent to Italy with his division. In April 1944, at just 21 years old, he rejoined Joachim Peiper and took command of the 7th Company of the SS Panzer Regiment in the city of Ghent, Belgium. They were later called to defend the Third Reich in Normandy. The High German Command highlighted his intervention in the defense of Tilly, emphasizing him as an example of military excellence. In 1944, in Belgium, he married Helga. Shortly after, he returned to the Panzer Regiment to command a military company. In March 1945, he took part in the final offensive operation known as Operation Spring Awakening. There, his nation sought to protect the last oil fields in the Lake Balaton area. After intense fighting and enduring the enemy's assault, Wolff saw his tank heavily damaged, and a few seconds later felt a severe head wound that left him unconscious. On March 19, 1945, he was taken to a hospital, and on that same day he died, 9 months after getting married and 2 months before the end of World War II. And so we have reached the end of the story. This was the fate of Joachim Peiper and Werner Wolff in World War II. Let us know in the comment section which fact about Peiper or Wolff surprised you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all the content of our channel. See you next time.